There are few video games as revered as the original Super Mario Bros. For many people, it was the first video game they ever played. It revolutionized the platforming genre and is often considered one of the most important games ever made, spawning a highly successful franchise that's still around all these decades later. Over the years, Super Mario Bros. Has received countless re-releases. Everything from cartridge variations, ports, emulated re-releases. There are many versions of this game, and today, we'll be taking a look at them. While the original Super Mario Bros. Is known inside and out by countless people, there are many variants and versions of the game that are often forgotten, and believe me, some of them are very intriguing. In this video, we'll be taking a look at just how many releases of the original Super Mario Bros. Exist. Let's begin. Of course, we'll be starting with the NES original. Super Mario Bros. Was first released for the Nintendo Famicom on September 13, 1985. Donned with beautiful box art, the original release of Super Mario Bros. Was near perfect. The game was a smash hit and was a true launchpad for the Mario franchise. Given the game's historical significance, it may come as a shock that no one actually knows the exact date of when it first came out in America. It might have been released with the NES itself, but it seems to have come out a little bit later. Regardless, it was definitely released sometime later that same year in America. However, the game didn't see a release in Europe until May 1987, and Australia didn't get the game until July 1987, though this makes sense given the NES had a later release in those regions. As for other regional releases, there are tons. There's the Hong Kong NES release, this Indian Samurai cart, the Canadian release, and different ones released all over Europe. Once the Famicom Disk System was released, a port of the game was released for it in Japan in February 1986, now being on a disc rather than a cartridge. This release is pretty well known because the famous Minus World glitch is much more interesting in this version. Here's a weird one, a Famicom box release of Super Mario Bros. What's that? The Famicom box was a specially designed Famicom made for use in Japanese hotels. If you've ever been to a hotel with N64 or GameCube games available to be played in your room, it's the same concept. You'd pay 100 yen, or roughly $1 US, in exchange for around 10 to 20 minutes of playtime. Super Mario Bros. Was one of the games that were available to be played on the system. The uniquely black cartridge has a lockout chip that makes it impossible to play it on other systems besides the Famicom box. There's also stuff to consider like label differences, making it easy to distinguish between printings. Stuff like this may seem inconsequential, but it makes a big difference to collectors. I'm not sure if this one is official, but here's one with a gold label named Mario Syndrome. I wouldn't think much of this one, but there is an official vinyl with the same name. Maybe it was a promo item? The label does look pretty nice. There are so many releases of Super Mario Bros. On just the NES and Famicom alone. There might even be more than the ones talked about here, but there are many more releases of the game besides re-releases on the same system, so let's move on. The same year the game saw its Famicom Disk System release, it also saw releases in the arcade. Following the success of the NES, Nintendo began distributing the PlayChoice 10, a series of arcade machines with boards consisting of 10 NES games each. With console gaming making the rounds in the mid-1980s, companies like Nintendo and Sega decided to repackage some of their games into arcade machines, as arcades were still very popular at the time. PlayChoice 10 cabinets included popular games like Dr. Mario, Balloon Fight, Excite Bike, and of course, Super Mario Bros. There aren't that many changes between the original and this conversion, but the most noticeable addition was a second screen. PlayChoice 10 machines had a tiny monitor built right above the gameplay screen, which was used to display additional information about whatever game was being played. Aside from that, this is pretty much the same Super Mario Bros. We all know and love, but it wasn't the only version of the game to come out in arcades. Along with the PlayChoice 10 machines, Nintendo released another set of arcade machines under the Versus series branding. These once again consisted of NES ports, but they were heavily modified in terms of gameplay and difficulty. Versus Super Mario Bros. Was released in Japan in June of 1986, and in North America later that year. This isn't just a straight port of the NES original to the arcades. Instead, this release has been modified to include some very hard levels, mostly taken from the Japanese Super Mario Bros. 2. Power-ups and extra lives are also much harder to come by. This was done to make the game harder to finish, forcing players to pay more after losing all of their lives. This was pretty ingenious, as fans of the NES game would be lured in by thinking it's the same as the game they have at home, only to find out it's much more challenging than expected. Once they realized this, they'd keep trying until they mastered this version of the game, paying a lot in the process. I remember playing this one in an arcade a few years ago. I didn't get very far, but let me tell you, playing Super Mario Bros. In an arcade setting is so cool. Definitely don't skip this one if you find it in person. However, if you can't find this version, you're in luck, as finally in 2017, nearly 3 decades after its release, it was re-released on the Nintendo Switch eShop. The first true home console re-release of Super Mario Bros. We'll be going over is one of the most interesting by far. It's likely you've heard of this one, but might not know where it comes from. Everyone knows that what Americans first got as Super Mario Bros. 2 was originally released in Japan as Yumi Kojo Doki Doki Panic, a game made to promote the Fuji TV Yumi Kojo 1987 event. The game was developed by Nintendo in collaboration with Fuji TV, one of the largest media companies in Japan. While the story of Doki Doki Panic is well known, it wasn't the first game Nintendo made in collaboration with the Fuji company. That title goes to the often forgotten promotional game All Night Nippon Super Mario Bros. All Night Nippon is a late-night Japanese radio talk show that's been running on Japanese radio since October 1967. In the 1980s, the 20th anniversary of the show was coming up fast, and Fuji wanted to celebrate the anniversary in an exciting and innovating way. Fuji was seeing huge successes in the markets of television and radio, but with video games on the rise, it was in their best interest to get into that industry as well. They soon started partnering with Nintendo in hopes to strengthen their grasp on the video game scene. The first result of this collaboration occurred in 1985. That year, All Night Nippon launched a contest where viewers would submit custom lyrics to the Super Mario Bros. Theme. The winner would have their lyrics used in the official lyrical version of the famous song. The winner was a song called Go Go Mario, and it premiered live on All Night Nippon following the contest. The song was not only endorsed by Nintendo, but was also released as a single by Pony Canyon. Nintendo hasn't forgotten about this song either, as a big band rendition of the song was performed at the Mario and Zelda Big Band concert, which was performed on September 14th, 2003 in Tokyo, Japan. I find it really cool that several official renditions of this song that started as simply a contest winner exist. It must have felt so amazing to be that winner. But anyway, the first collaboration between Nintendo and All Night Nippon was a success, but that song contest was just the beginning. In April of 1986, Pony Canyon released a VHS titled The Great Mario Adventure. The VHS is pretty strange, starring a very weird-looking Mario mascot costume, who tells the viewers some tips and tricks for the original Super Mario Bros. The VHS also contains a music video for Go Go Mario. While very weird to look at nowadays, this song and the VHS are significant as they're some of, if not the first important pieces of Super Mario media. Considering how huge the franchise is today, that's really cool. The success of these promotions showed that Nintendo and Mario could work in more than just video games, and could exist in other entertainment mediums. All of these contests and promotions made Nintendo and Fuji TV very close. These promoted All Night Nippon and Super Mario Bros. In unprecedented ways. It was beneficial for both companies to keep things going. In October of 1986, 19 years after the first broadcast of All Night Nippon, the show's 20th anniversary campaign named All Together Now was announced. The show announced they'd be doing several giveaways, one of which being a limited edition version of Super Mario Bros. For the Famicom Disk System. It was announced that in December of 1986, 3,000 winners would receive a copy of a game called All Night Nippon Super Mario Bros., an official retooling of the original game with various show-themed changes. Only 3,000 copies were produced for and given away through the contest, but the demand was so high, Nintendo eventually produced another limited run of the game, to give those who missed out another chance to get a copy, but even that additional run was very scarce and was sold at a premium price. All Night Nippon Super Mario Bros. Is essentially an officially licensed hack of the original game, completely authorized by Nintendo. The changes are pretty apparent. The graphical upgrades seen in the Japanese Super Mario Bros. 2 have all been added to the original in this release. So the mushrooms, the ground, the clouds, everything looks more detailed. Also taking inspiration from Super Mario Bros. 2, the two-player mode is removed, and instead you can pick to play the game as either Mario or Luigi. One of my favorite changes is that they made most of the stages set at nighttime, given the show it's based on always runs late at night. Now that's all great, but what really makes this game All Night Nippon themed? Oh, most of the enemies and characters have been replaced with caricatures of famous stars from the radio show. It's likely almost all of these are lost on most players today, but I'm sure for the time it was pretty cool. Various items have been replaced as well. For example, the axe used to defeat Bowser is replaced with the Fuji TV symbol, which is also seen on the castle flags at the end of levels. As for the levels themselves, a majority of them are from the original game, with only slight changes such as the placements of power-ups. However, after World 5-2, levels from Super Mario Bros. 2 are used in place of some of the ones from the original. Given this was a contest prize, it's likely all of the winners had already played the original game, so I assume this was done to keep the game feeling fresh. If you wish to find a copy of it today, remember it had a very limited release, so it's not that easy to find. Though if you can locate a copy, it's certainly worth it. Video game collaborations and tie-ins aren't too uncommon, but something so in-depth like this will likely never happen again, especially with Mario. I mean, this was Nintendo letting another company retool their flagship game. Truly, this is one of the most interesting releases in Mario's lineup. So, you could officially play Super Mario Bros. On your NES, in your Japanese hotel, and in arcades. But what about computers? Was there an official computer release of Super Mario Bros? Surely not, right? Well, actually, there was. Once again released in 1986, Super Mario Bros. Special was released not on a Nintendo system, but instead on the popular computers at the time in Japan. It was also later released in South Korea as well. Super Mario Bros. Special was developed by Hudson Soft, who had entered a deal with Nintendo to port their popular games to Japanese computers. Their previous efforts included Mario Bros. Special, Punchball Mario Bros., and an obscure PC pseudo-sequel to Donkey Kong 3. This means Super Mario Bros. Special was the first ever Mario game not developed by Nintendo themselves. This game is technically a PC conversion of the original Super Mario Bros., but features heavily modified levels, new power-ups, and much more. One of the most obvious changes is the lack of fluent screen scrolling, with each screen being its own separate chunk of level. While this was improved upon with later releases of the game was never able to achieve the side-scrolling effect perfected by the NES game. Other differences include changes to audio and graphics due to PCs being less powerful than the NES at the time, the complete lack of Luigi, and the bizarre color palette. It also introduced some really cool new power-ups. These include a hammer, which mimics how it acted in Donkey Kong, along with wings, which allowed Mario to effectively swim in air until the power-up wore off. While not technically the original game, this one is just so interesting. A PC version of Super Mario Bros. Released only a year after the original that wasn't even made by Nintendo? Clearly they were a lot more flexible with the Mario brand back then. This one is even less recognizable than Special, but the game was also released as a Game & Watch title in 1986. Definitely one of the coolest Game & Watch releases. And it also seems like this inspired one of the most reoccurring games on bootleg LCD systems, often known as Super Mary. It's interesting to see how many variants of the original Super Mario Bros. Came out in such a short time. It's no wonder the game became the phenomenon it is. Even early on, Super Mario Bros. Saw many re-releases, with various compilation cartridges being released for the NES itself. The most well-known and the most common being the Super Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt cart, which was released in 1988. That same year, a more obscure cartridge containing Super Mario Bros., Tetris, and Nintendo World Cup was released in Europe. A few years later, in 1990, one with Super Mario Bros., Duck Hunt, and World Class Track Meet was released. This one's cool because it features artwork based off the sprite art seen in the original Black Box release. There's also a variant where Fire Mario has more accurate colors. Famously, Super Mario Bros. Was one of the 3 games played during the 1990 Nintendo World Championships, with the others being Rad Racer and Tetris. In the Super Mario Bros. Segment, the player's goal is to collect 50 coins as fast as possible. Once they've done that, they move on to the next game. All 3 games are included on the official Nintendo World Championships cartridges, which was produced in both gray, these were the ones used at the actual event, as well as an additional 26 gold cartridges, which were given away to Nintendo Power Readers through a contest. While it doesn't include the full game, this is undoubtedly the rarest release of Super Mario Bros. By 1993, it had already been a long time since the release of Super Mario Bros., and the NES had almost completely been phased out by the Super Nintendo. Mario made his jump to the system with Super Mario World, but Nintendo was not going to let the world forget how Mario got his start. They did this through what was actually a pretty novel concept at the time, by remaking their older games. In 1993, Nintendo released Super Mario All-Stars, known as Super Mario Collection in Japan, for the Super Nintendo. As the Japanese name implies, this release collects the 4 core NES Mario games, containing both versions of Super Mario Bros. 2. Actually, I should probably mention the Japanese Super Mario Bros. 2, known here as Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels, as technically this game was more or less an expansion or modification of the original. I did give Super Mario Bros. Special its own segment, but Lost Levels is of course its own game. That'd be like saying Sonic 2 was a re-release of Sonic 1 as it's built off of it. Super Mario All-Stars features complete remakes of the original games, all converted from 8-bit to 16-bit, featuring updated graphics and sound, giving the games a complete makeover. If given the chance to play either the original or All-Stars release of the games, I bet most would pick the originals. But this was such a great deal for the time, and it's really nice to have them all on one cartridge. To make the deal even sweeter, a year later in December 1994, the collection was re-released in North America and Europe as Super Mario All-Stars plus Super Mario World. Mario World was now a 5th title in the collection. In 1997, the All-Stars version of Super Mario Bros. Was re-released in Japan through the Super Famicom Satellaview peripheral. The Satellaview was a device released exclusively in Japan that allowed players to download games, view news articles, and even stream satellite radio, all from their Super Famicom. BS Super Mario Collection was available to be played in segments. Super Mario Bros. Was playable from December 28, 1997 to January 3, 1998. This wouldn't be the last time Super Mario All-Stars would see a re-release, however. The year was 2010. It was the 25th anniversary of the release of Super Mario Bros. What was Nintendo going to do to celebrate this monumental occasion? A few things, including some stuff we'll get to later, but their main release for the anniversary was this: Super Mario All-Stars, a limited edition. No way, is this a remake of All-Stars? Giving the 4 classics new Wii-era remakes? In a very Nintendo move, this is actually just the Super Nintendo ROM printed onto a Wii disc and sold physically. I guess they thought a game containing 4 Mario adventures was too much for a simple virtual console release. Instead of $8 as those normally were, this release was $30 at launch. Now, to purchase the original 4 games on the Wii Virtual Console separately, it would have been around $21. So how do they justify the extra $9? Well, this wasn't treated as a standard release, instead coming in a thicker box, containing the game itself as well as an art book and anniversary soundtrack. I found the art book to be extremely interesting, but I'm sure most Mario fans who were excited for this release were disappointed. It certainly makes for a nice novelty, but $30 was a bit steep. You'll also notice that this isn't the version of the game that includes Super Mario World. This was because that was already released on the Wii Virtual Console and was $8 alone. One of the funniest things about this already pretty odd release is that despite being called limited, Nintendo re-released the game under their budget Nintendo Selects label in March of 2016. This release doesn't include any of the cool extras, but it isn't so limited now, is it? Here's something pretty cute. To promote this release of the game, Nintendo sent out in-character letters from Peach to various press outlets. That's pretty neat. Can you believe this one release of Super Mario Bros. Has multiple re-releases itself? It goes to show just how many times this game has been released. We got a little ahead of ourselves there. Time to go back to the 90s. The game was ported to the Game Boy Color in 1999 in the form of Super Mario Bros. Deluxe. This was a complete port of the game, but with various new modes and extras. It featured additions like a multiplayer versus mode, the option to switch between Mario or Luigi at any time during the main game, it had a save feature, and once you scored enough points in the original game, you could unlock a modified version of the Japanese Super Mario Bros. 2, known here as Super Mario Bros. For Super Players. The game also featured various new challenges to beat, such as collecting red coins or finding hidden Yoshi eggs. There were also some mini-games included as well, sorta like those in Mario 64 DS. You could unlock symbols that you could actually print out with the Game Boy printer. There's even a calendar you can view. There's so much stuff in this version of the game. The only real downside is that since this was on a Game Boy Color, the screen is more zoomed in compared to the original. Besides that though, you really can't go wrong with this one. Curiously, this game was never released in Japan as a standard Game Boy Color cartridge, instead only being available as a downloadable game through the short-lived Nintendo Power cartridge system. This obscure service allowed players to download Super Famicom or Game Boy games onto a flash memory cartridge for cheaper than retail price. This was the only official way Japanese players could obtain Super Mario Bros. Deluxe, which was released alongside the Game Boy service on March 1st, 2000. If you haven't tried it yet, I highly recommend this version of the game. Animal Crossing was released for the Nintendo GameCube in 2002, and one of the coolest features of the game is that you could obtain NES consoles, which you could actually play. You obtained these through Nook's Lottery, finding them in the Animal Island minigame, and some were even only available through special Animal Crossing e-reader cards. 15 different NES games were available to be obtained through official methods in-game, but there were 4 more that were in the game that couldn't be obtained normally. These games have become known as the Forbidden 4: Ice Climber, Mario Bros., Super Mario Bros., and The Legend of Zelda. Ice Climber and Mario Bros. Were eventually released through special e-reader cards, but the other 2 never had cards released for them. It's possible they were intended to be released but were scrapped. In Japan, there was a time you could officially obtain Super Mario Bros. Through a Famitsu giveaway, but unless you participated in that all those years ago, you have to hack it into the game. So, despite its near impossibility to obtain, the full game is there, so technically it counts. 2003 marked the 20th anniversary of the Famicom in Japan, and 2005 marked the 20th anniversary of the NES in North America, and it was a perfect time to re-release some NES games. As such, in 2004, Nintendo introduced the Famicom Mini-Series in Japan and the Classic NES series in America, a collection of NES games on Game Boy Advance cartridges, released for $20 each. A little much for unaltered NES games, but these sold on novelty alone. One of the first games released in the series was of course Super Mario Bros., which was released in Japan on February 14th, 2004, and in America on June 2nd, 2004. This release of the game was a port with no additional features, as it was made to be just like the NES cartridge. Despite this, it was awesome to have a new way to play Super Mario Bros. On the go in a near-perfect way. Along with that, this series no doubt introduced these NES games to a ton of younger fans as well. Over in Japan, Club Nintendo had a special offer where you could purchase all of the Famicom mini-games in a set, known as the Famicom Mini Collection Box. Super Mario Bros. Was one of the games included in the first volume. These Game Boy Advance re-releases were nice, but this was just the start of Nintendo re-releasing their classic games on current hardware. The Virtual Console service was launched alongside the Wii on November 19, 2006. The service allowed you to purchase classic games on the Wii Shop channel. Surprisingly, Super Mario Bros. Wasn't there at launch, instead being released on Christmas Day 2006, which was probably a very smart move. I wonder how many downloads it got on launch day from families who had just gotten their Wiis for Christmas. In Japan, they got Super Mario Bros. A bit earlier on December 2nd. Europe and Australia got the game in 2007, and South Korea got it in 2008. For 500 Wii points, or roughly $5 US, you could purchase and download the game onto your Wii. Super Smash Bros. Brawl was released in 2008, and it features a Masterpieces mode, where players can go through short demos of games significant to characters in the roster. Super Mario Bros. Is one of the games included in this mode. Now, Nintendo is not one to alter their classic games. In fact, it was basically a rule that any Virtual Console release of a game had to be the original release on the original system. However, there was one time Nintendo broke that rule with Super Mario Bros. During the 25th anniversary, Nintendo didn't just re-release Super Mario All-Stars, they also released this special Red Wii as well. The Japanese release of the system came with an exclusive modified Virtual Console release of Super Mario Bros., pre-downloaded to the system itself. Say hello to Super Mario Bros. 25th Anniversary Edition. The only change made was they replaced the question marks on the question mark blocks with the number 25. Yeah, it's not much, but it's something. It's pretty likely that Nintendo is never going to mention this version of the game ever again, so to play it officially, you'll need to get yourself a Japanese Red Wii. You're not missing much, but it was interesting to see Nintendo release what was essentially an official ROM hack as a way to celebrate Mario's anniversary. We're almost done here, but there are a few more recent releases to still cover. In August 2011, Nintendo launched the 3DS Ambassador program. The program offered 10 free NES games and 10 free Game Boy Advance games that could be downloaded through the 3DS eShop. Super Mario Bros. Was one of the games released through the program. It later received a full 3DS Virtual Console release in 2012. The game was also released for the Wii U Virtual Console service in 2012 in Japan, and in 2013 for the rest of the world. It was also one of the many games featured in NES Remix. As part of the Year of Luigi celebration in 2013, NES Remix 2 features a version of the game called Super Luigi Bros. It's a retool of the game that features Luigi as the main character. Every level in the game is also mirrored, giving old fans a new challenge. Ultimate NES Remix for the 3DS also has a version of Super Mario Bros. This one is called Speed Mario Bros. And is identical to the original, only it runs at 2x speed. Super Smash Bros. For the Wii U brought back the Masterpieces mode from Brawl, and Super Mario Bros. Is once again one of the featured titles. The game was also made available through Amiibo Tap, Nintendo's Greatest Bits, in 2015. In the game, players scan Amiibo figures onto the Wii U gamepad to unlock highlights of some classic Nintendo games, including Super Mario Bros. The game was featured as one of the 30 NES games available to be played on the NES Classic Edition, released in 2016. The game was also one of the first to be playable through the Nintendo Switch Online service. At this point, Super Mario Bros. Is available to be played on nearly every single Nintendo console, and I'm sure it'll keep being re-released as new hardware is introduced. By now, we've covered almost every official release of Super Mario Bros. But when you open the floodgates and start looking at bootleg releases of the game, well, bootleg Famicoms were everywhere in the 80s and 90s, and with Super Mario Bros. Being the premier game for the system, it was undoubtedly one of the most faked. It was included on a ton of multi-carts, as well as standalone releases. Not a ton of these are very interesting, but some of them have some pretty crazy labels. Most pirates of the game simply change the art to remove any mention of Mario or Nintendo. Some are a bit more interesting, but given this video's topic, are there any bootleg ports of the game? As it turns out, yes! Introducing Sonic Jam 6? A bootleg game made for the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive released in 1998, made by a bootleg development team named GameTech. This game is notable as it's essentially a reverse of Samari. That game was a bootleg of Sonic 1 on the NES, but you play as Mario. This game is a bootleg of Super Mario Bros. On the Sega Genesis, but you play as Sonic. It's a port of the All-Stars version of the game, and while there are a lot of weird inaccuracies, it's not the worst thing ever. The full game is here. There's a proper power-up system. You go from a red Sonic to a blue Sonic to a blue Sonic who can shoot fireballs. Nothing out of the ordinary there. Even the water levels made it over. The music has also been somewhat faithfully ported, though it does sound weird coming out of the Sega Genesis. At the end of the game, you have your final face-off with Bowser, who dies from one fireball. For your amazing feat of beating a bootleg version of Super Mario Bros., Peach says, "Thank you, Sonic, the kingdom is saved! Now try again." I think one of the highlights of the game are the weird blown-up sprites of Sonic, like on the title screen or the level start screen. While Sonic Jam 6 alone is interesting enough, it's not the whole story. In another similar case to Samari, this wasn't the only version of the game that the bootleggers made. Just like how there's a hack of Samari where you play as Sonic, there's a version of Sonic Jam 6 where you play as Mario. This version of the game goes by names such as Super Mario Bros. 2 and Super Mario Bros. 1998. It's the same game, just with a more fitting Mario skin. They did forget to change the text at the end though, so Sonic is still thanked. It seems the Sonic version came first, as its cartridge ID is 1 unit before the Mario version's ID. Speaking of that, these two games can be found in many different cases and cartridges. Here's what's believed to be the original release of Sonic Jam 6, with box art stolen from the book Where's Sonic Now? It seems the official name of the game is really just Sonic 6. I assume Jam is in the game only because bootleggers decided to rip off that game's title screen. Here's a more recent release featuring Sonic Riders art, definitely not telling of the game inside. Here's the original cartridge of, Super 1998 Mario 2. Most releases of this game use art from either Super Mario 64 or its DS remake. The world of bootleg Mario games, even just the world of bootleg Mario games on the Genesis, surely is an interesting one. And there you have it, a look at how many ports and releases of Super Mario Bros. Exist. There are a lot of versions of this game, and I'm sure we didn't even cover all of them. For example, there are many more Mario bootleg clones that sorta count, but are outside the realm of this video. I could also mention the countless fan ports of the game, or just fan games in general. Super Mario Bros. Crossover will always hold a special place in my heart. With that said, it's no surprise the game has been released so many times. I mean, it's Super Mario Bros., one of the most revolutionary games of all time. Of course it's playable in so many different ways. I think it's great that so many versions of this game exist. It's fascinating to see the improvements or compromises each release made to fit its format. Not to mention, each generation of Mario fans have a different version of the game they grew up with. It's pretty cool to look at it all. Super Mario Bros. Is one of those timeless games that will never get old, and its staying power is bolstered by the numerous ports, retools, and re-releases it's gotten over the years. Through these re-releases, the impact and legacy of Super Mario Bros. Will never be forgotten.